You live in a dystopia. Every part of historical human existence in our world has been turned on its head. The world we live in is an inversion of what God created you to live in. All that is good is treated as though it were repugnant. All that is beautiful is treated as though it were repulsive. And the truth is forbidden, while the most outrageous lies are exalted. This world did not become like this by accident or by inexorable forces of history. This world was engineered to be this way. It was designed to take the life your ancestors had and tear it apart to prevent you from attaining a normal, human way of life. After the events of 2020, the lockdowns, the regime-sponsored riots, and the dubious election, many people became aware of the fact that we have elites who rule over us who might not have our best interests in mind. For at least a segment of the population, the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, George Soros, and the late Jeffrey Epstein became household names. Millions of people are now terrified of what apocalyptic hellscape these people will create. But they're not asking the right questions. The question is not, what are they planning to do to us? What you should be asking is, what have they already done? And what can people do about it?
You call it trash world. Some guys call it clown world. Mm-hmm. But one thing that you did really well, I think, just in the preface is talking about how it's fake and gay, and not just to get a rise, but those words are intentional. Let's talk about fakeness and gayness of trash world and how we need to recognize it and push back.
Yeah. Well, the fakeness and the gayness, and I talk about this in the book, and I'll say that a lot here. But I talk about this in the book that it's not just like a schoolyard slur or something that's intentionally provocative. Of course, it is intentionally provocative, but it isn't just that. It isn't just something to make you recoil. There's a deep meaning to it that. The world around us is fake. It's not real. It's totally artificial. The entire way of life that we now have is not something that is, one, sustainable. It's not something that is a way that human beings have really ever lived in our entire existence. And it's all set up by this kind of house of cards, both socially and economically and everything else, politically. And when you begin to see it, and you have to have some kind of understanding of history of like, how did my great grandparents live? Right? How did people 200-300 years ago live? What were their lives like? Who did they have families and extended kin networks and neighborhoods and communities that they were deeply invested in, a part of? And those are things that just don't exist anymore, and they don't exist because everyone just forgot. Like, oh, we just forgot how to live like human beings. No, it's been designed to be a way where you are totally isolated, and the only reason for existence for most people is just to consume product to entertain themselves until they die. And we can get into the gayness aspect of it as well.
Does that need explanation? I don't know.
It does.
It does. Yeah,
it does. I can read some more the section later
before
on.
We get there, so let's talk about fake and gay. Break it down. Start with fake. One of the things that you said that I found really helpful was just saying that one of the reasons why our overlords can get away, and our culture just at large can get away with being so fake, is because of the accrued capital that's come from like the Industrial Revolution, or just the last 100 years of accruing just a massive amount of wealth. Like Doug Wilson says it like this. He says the prodigal. When he took his father's money, he didn't spend it all, overnight. It took a while for him to actually, because his dad worked hard. His dad was wealthy. So it's a lot of wealth that you got to burn through. And one of those things is, it's not just the capital and the wealth, but it's also when you think about how people work today, how they produce, because of innovations and technology and all these kinds of things, it allows for us to pretend, especially when we think about gender, it allows us to pretend that there really is no difference between male and female, because once upon a time, in order to produce, in order to work, you actually require physical strength in a way that we don't necessarily require it today. And so I thought that would be interesting to talk about the dynamics between men and women and those kinds of things, and how, so.
Yeah, no, I was just when I read that first chapter, it reminded me of something. I've had conversations many times with people, and they've been thanking me for the videos I do, whatever. And one of the things they will often say is, "It was nice to know that I wasn't crazy."
Yeah,
right.
And that is people, because your families are real, your kids are real, like your, especially Christians, they've got a lot of times a connection with reality. But then they see how fake everything is, and they start to wonder, maybe I'm crazy.
Yeah.
And when they see others that are like that, they're, well, I guess I'm not.
Yeah.
Right.
That's where the fakeness comes in here.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's part of the design too, is they want people to be isolated and alone, so that when you notice, oh, things are not right, everybody else is still, plugged into the matrix, and you're not. And you feel like you're the one that's taking crazy pills, and you're completely alone, right? You have nobody alongside with you that says, no, things are really bad. So yeah, when you discover that, there are other people that think like you do, that see these things are this way, it's a huge boost. You're not alone. You aren't. They want you to think you are, but you're not. And that's part of it. And to one of the things Joel said, it isn't just the material wealth that was accrued over the last 100 or 200 years that were, the equity we're quickly burning through. But it's also every other form of wealth, like social capital, and just inherited virtue across an entire society and civilization, that took decades, centuries, millennia to accrue and to build up. Like the idea, and you would see this. I remember, like when I was in college, that's when the new atheists were doing their thing, like Christopher Hitchens and Daniel Dennett and like
James
that.
Lindsay.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh yeah,
and like he's the young guy. Like these are all the old guys. But yeah, they were doing their thing and saying, they were always arguing that, like I remember Christopher Hitchens was always like, oh no, man can be good without God. We can have virtue without God. And in those days, in the early 2000s, you could say stuff like that, right? You could say, because you could just be naive and think, oh no, we got all of this social capital and a fairly virtuous, stable, well-ordered society just randomly. It just appeared out of nowhere, because that's how human beings are.
Right.
And today, in year of our Lord 2023, they can't make that same argument anymore, that the world is actually a very brutal place. Even just the idea of being able to have a society where I come from a very small town, and growing up, at least, nobody would lock their doors. A lot of people still don't. They don't lock their car doors. And when I went and lived in bigger cities, I tell people this, that's what people do there. They couldn't fathom that. Like, how could you not lock your home when you leave? Like, you're going to get robbed. And that's what's happened across our entire civilization. You used to be able to have very safe communities where people could live in peace, and that didn't happen by accident. That kind of world was built across a millennia of Christian discipleship, and we've burned through that very quickly, especially in the last 20 years. And so this idea, right, that man can be good without God. Well, that's a much harder argument for these people to make. And people are beginning to see this now, that you actually need the capital that's been built up over generations to be able to have a functioning, stable society, and it's gone.
Right.
It's gone. And so the question is, and this is stuff we'll get into over all of these episodes that we're doing, is how do you as an individual, right? What can one man do in a world that's gone insane, right? What can one man do in a world that is burns down cathedrals that took us 2 centuries to build, right? I think that, like, the burning of Notre Dame is kind of almost like a visual symbol of what has occurred, where here's this cathedral, took hundreds of years to finally complete, and most of it burns down in a single day. And that's trash world.
Right.
That's what we've done, is this beautiful thing, this beautiful structure our ancestors toiled over. They didn't even get to see it finished and see the glory of this thing. It can go quickly. And
Right.
it isn't just tangible material wealth, which is the obvious one. It's everything. It's having a society where people put their shopping carts back in the cart corral, and that's just assumed, right? Things like even little tiny things like that, where you go to the fast food place and you expect to get good service,
Right.
or a restaurant, and the person to refill your drinks.
Vodi
that's
Bakum
gone,
said, I
you know?
remember doing an interview with him, and he said, you can tell, what religion and what kind of like Christian capital a society has when you come to a 4-way stop.
Yeah.
Like you can tell, like, has Christendom been here before, or has it not? Like what is just the mindset? Is there law? Is there order? Is there consideration? All those kinds of things. And so, we're living in trash world. We're living in a world that is quickly burning up the capital because in part, it's like we refuse to recognize where it came from, because we don't want to pay homage to Christ. We don't want to kiss the Son. We don't want to honor God and say that, well, this capital came from generations and generations of people fearing the Lord and living in obedience to his commands. And so we're pretending that it just fell out of the sky. We're going to credit everything to the inventions and innovations of man, rather than recognizing that these inventions and innovations came from a Christian worldview, acknowledging God. And so that's some of the fakeness. But to talk about a little bit of the gayness,
Let me just say this too. One thing, because it's one thing that you reminded me of. It seems to be accelerating too.
Yeah.
So, and it kind of reminds me, I think it might have been Hemingway. They asked him how he went broke.
Yeah.
And he said, little by little and then all at once.
Right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it certainly seems like that's happening, where over time we've been engineered into this fakeness, and all that capital that you're talking about is kind of, we've been taking it out, not depositing anything back in. And now it's like, we got almost nothing. What do we have? Like, there's very little capital left.
Right.
And so it's just, it seems to be accelerating. And I think lots of people have picked up on that recently.
Right. Which is a grace. Like I've told, people, and I know you guys have probably said the same, but like 2020 was a mercy from the Lord in the sense that things got worse, but they got worse finally bad enough and quick enough to where, maybe somebody would notice.
And back to back.
Back to back. Exactly.
All over like a year.
Yep. And so that really was a mercy. So, the fake factor is there. So trash world, two big components. It's a fake world. It's not real. We're pretending, but also it's, as you said, it's a gay world. And so in this, I'm just going to go ahead and read a portion. In the 1980s, as the AIDS epidemic was at its height, the leftist French philosopher Michel Foucault nevertheless continued to regularly attend bathhouse orgies and homosexual sadomasochistic clubs. He famously wrote, "Sex is worth dying for." He meant what he said. He died of AIDS in 1984. See, for the homosexual, insatiable desires must be pursued even knowing it will cost him his life. In economic terms, he is the ultimate high-time preference man. The ultimate high-time preference man. He only lives in the present. There is no thought for the future. He is quite obviously incapable of pursuing offspring. He is willing to cut off any and all social relations that prevent him from pursuing his predilections. In short, the homosexual is both the apex consumer and the easiest personality to manipulate and lord over. That's our society. People are easy to manipulate because we've been reduced to our basest desires, where it's all about vice. It's not about virtue. We call vice a virtue. We call virtue a vice. People want what they want. They want it now. Want supersede actual needs, because in part because we refuse to acknowledge what are the true needs of humanity, because we've rejected theology, the study of God, who God is, and so therefore we're off on our anthropology, who man is. Therefore, we can't define what man actually needs to thrive as an individual and in a society. And so if we don't actually know who God is, therefore we don't know who man is, therefore we don't know what man requires, then it's just, okay, forget what man requires. What does man desire? What is this man, me? What do I want? I want it now, and I live for that. And it doesn't matter, who cares about what it's going to do to me in the long run, and much less, what it's going to do to my descendants.
All right, I'm just going to say it. This show is fantastic. You know it's fantastic. I know it's fantastic, but I'm willing to admit there is one singular problem: the waiting zone. Right? You got to wait a whole week for each new episode of this show to drop on Fridays at 4 p.m. Central Time. Unless you go on over to patreon.com/Right Response Ministries. And then you'll be able to binge watch every single episode of an entire season all in one day. So this is a season-based show, right? The whole idea is a deep dive on one singular topic so that you know everything there is to know. Each season comes out in a quarter, right? So a 3-month period, anywhere from probably 8 to 12 episodes in a season. And the moment that the first episode of a new season drops to the public, then you can go over to patreon.com/Right Response Ministries and watch all of those episodes without having to wait week by week by week for the next episode to publicly drop. So, you know what to do. Don't waste any more time. Binge watch the whole season today.
So it's not just about men having sex with other men.
No.
Gayness goes way beyond that.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So when you use the term,
Yeah.
and that's kind of, the title that we're kind of playing around with this episode, it's proposed. We'll see what it actually ends up being. But the title is, trash world, fake and gay, but then saying how this, actually seeped into the church.
Yeah.
How evangelicals are gay. And that they've become spiritual homosexuals, that they become, and what we mean by that is not that they actually are sexually attracted to the same sex, but we're saying that evangelicals, by and large, sadly, to our shame, we've become fruitless.
Yeah.
We've become fruitless.
Yeah. Yeah. We've adopted the same mindset and lifestyle that the homosexual has. I mean, that's what our culture has become. Is to a fruitless society that lives to consume, right? Whatever it produces, it immediately consumes, right? That's the kind of world that we live in today, and it, of course, like within the church and within both regular evangelical churches and the big Eva on high that kind of influences everything. It gets dressed up. It gets dressed up as in very holy pietistic language. Like you can put lipstick on that pig really well. And you see that, you see it especially over the last 10 or 15 years where people will talk about the gift of singleness and how singleness is so great and so wonderful. And like, why are they saying this? Who are they saying this to? They're saying it to the young 20, 30 something year old people who, have jobs, have careers, things like that, and have a little bit of income. And instead of forming families, instead of getting married and having children, they don't, for whatever reason. Maybe they can't find a spouse. Maybe they don't want to find a spouse. And so it gives them this kind of cover of, you're perfectly fine the way you are. Just go pursue your life. Go on vacations, have fun, go have brunch with your friends every on the weekends and take pictures of the food and put it on Instagram. Like that's a perfectly wonderful, holy, fulfilling lifestyle. And Jesus never got married. Paul never got married. Right. So you're just like them. And so they can dress it up that way. But really what it is giving license to this same thing that we're talking about, a society that is intentionally fruitless, that is intentionally consumerist and hyper consumerist, where you're not producing anything for descendants, for any culture, right? Even going back to some of the stuff we already talked about, you see the people who lose their minds over over Christian culture, right? And or cultural Christianity rather,
Right, yeah.
And they hate it. I mean, like famously, Russell Moore decried it in, I think, the New York Times or one of a big publication.
Yep,
and
I remember.
And said, "Oh, Mayberry leads to hell just as swiftly as Gomorrah," and he thought that was such a clever, great line.
Yeah, it was stupid.
And it's like, I want to live in Mayberry. I don't want to live in Gomorrah. Yes, people go to hell in both places, but for very different reasons. And so you see this. It's like, no, we can let the Christian capital burn down. We can burn through all of that, and that's good because that's good for the church. Because persecution's great for.
But one of the big differences between Sodom and Mayberry is not just that they go to hell for different reasons, but the way that the people who are going to hell treat the people who are going to heaven, right? Like in Sodom, like the way that Lot gets treated, right? So like there are, in a bad city or a good city, there's going to be, people who are unregenerate. There's going to be people who are. And that's not even to get into the percentages and numbers, because I think in a good city, I think that actually does lend towards more people actually being born again by grace alone, through faith in Christ alone.
Absolutely.
But aside from the numbers, the people, whatever it is, the people who are regenerate, the people who are God's elect, who are going to heaven, Mayberry is going to allow them to live in a heavenly way. With far less persecution and opposition than Sodom is going to allow Lot and his daughters to live. So
absolutely.
It's just categorically different. How is that not a net positive, especially when you have children? Like I like to think, it's like I have kids. I'm not just thinking about the life to come. That is premier and it matters immensely. But I'm also thinking about my children, their physical welfare here and now. I'm thinking about where can I raise them where they're going to be protected, where they're safe, and where I'm even allowed to raise them, and where they won't be taken away from me, and all those kinds of things. So
and so much of it is, if you're burning through the capital of cultural Christianity. I mean, God uses means, right? I always tell people, when they ask, well, why are you a Christian? It's like, well, I was raised by a Christian family, and most of the people around me were Christians growing up. Christian, at least, moral practice pervaded the whole society, whether or not people actually believed in Jesus or not.
Yeah.
And all of those things are means that God used to bring me to Him.
Absolutely.
And if I was not raised in a Christian family and everybody I know everywhere hated Jesus, that's a lot harder.
Right. Absolutely. It always boggles my mind when guys like Russell Moore say stuff like that, because they almost want to shame you if your story of how you became a Christian is something like what you just said, that's not legitimate. You're not a legitimate Christian if that's how you came. Yeah. That's just not how it works in reality. I've told you a little bit about my story on the drive here, and I was not always a believer, and I did a lot of degenerate things. But when I, came to the end of myself, I ran to the church because that's how I was raised. My father raised me in that context. My brother and my sister, my mother, all my family, they were Christians. And so when I knew that I was a disaster and the final straw, we won't talk about that, that's what I did. Yeah. I went to the church because I knew that's how I was raised. There's everything good about that. And in Mayberry, there's going to be people that do the exact same thing. And in Sodom, their lot is pretty bleak. Yeah. If they come to the end of themselves. Because usually rock bottom for them is something disastrous. And where do they go?
There's nowhere to go.
There's nowhere to go.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's a great point.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah. So with all that, I think about going back to the singleness for a second. So that's been a huge lie. Singleness is a gift. Just for the record, biblically speaking, singleness is not a gift. Celibacy is a gift. Yeah. So, there's a lot of people who think
what's the difference, Joel?
Well, the difference is that if you're single and masturbating, then you don't have a gift. Yeah. You don't have you don't have the gift of, you shouldn't be single. Yeah. Like the one who burns, and that's another thing is the Bible, what it prescribes to the problem of lust is marriage. And if you're really struggling with lust, then the Bible says marry faster. That you actually should pursue marriage. And right now you've got a bunch of, thanks to the Gospel Coalition and some of these teachers, you got a bunch of single, individuals, men and women, who actually, have been talked into thinking that what they have is a gift. But at the end of the day, many of them are not living in sexual purity. And so they're they're not actually, they don't actually have the gift of celibacy. They shouldn't be single. They should be, that burning, that passion should be a driving force. And there's a million reasons why singleness is prolongated in our culture today. And we'll get to some of those, but part of it is economics. Part of it is pornography. Part of it, but part of it is bad teaching in the church. The world doesn't really want, when you think of, again, the fakeness and the gayness, being, you can't reproduce, you're fruitless. It's YOLO. You only live once. You're living for this generation. This is the apex of humanity. We've climaxed and we just want another good, 20 to 50 years. And then we don't care if all of humanity, ceases to exist. That's the mindset of the world. But that has seeped into the church as well, I think, in many ways. And so when you think even for like a team of elders or deacons or, a pastor, if he persuades everybody in his church that they should get married, and that they should have children, and that if the Lord would bless them towards this end, they should seek to have many children, and they shouldn't rely on the public school system to raise those children for them. So that means they're going to be paying extra tuition for a Christian school, or not be able to rely on a second income from mom because she's going to be in the home homeschooling. All those have numbers attached to them. There's math involved with that.
Well, this and what you see, all the math associated with all this stuff, it is definitely difficult to do the things that you're saying, to actually have a family, to have a household, to have children, and to not rely on the dual income like you're saying. This is extremely difficult. And this book, that's an intentional thing, that it's become difficult.
Right. Yeah.
It's not just random, because we know all of the stories from our parents about what their house cost when they bought it and what they made. My dad's a nuclear engineer, and he told me what he made, when I was a kid, and it just completely blew my mind. I mean, that's what an administrative assistant makes now, or a desk worker, or a receptionist. And yet, we had a decent standard of living.
It was more money. He made less, but in real,
it was more,
buying power, it was infinitely more.
Way more.
And so part of the trash world and the fakeness and the gayness of it is this artificial way that it's been become difficult to actually have a real life.
Right.
Yeah, and you don't see it. It's not like it's not like it's this overt thing where, now you went to college and you have your career and all of this, and now you should be able to afford a home and be able to get married and have children because that's what your parents did. And now it takes for many people that second income just to be able to keep their head above water. Yeah. And that, like you said, that's by design. They've sapped things away. It isn't like, now the tax rate is at 90% when it was at 30 before. But functionally it is. They've sucked away so much wealth through inflation, and through various other, economic degradations, that you see the dollar amount that you make compared to what your dad made in like 1985. And you think, I make so much more money than my dad made when he was my age, but you don't at all. You make way less in real terms. And that's not by accident. They want people to be stuck in this way where you barely have any expendable income. The hope of living how human beings have lived for millennia, of having a wife and children, is just out of reach. It's something I'm never going to be able to get to that point.
Right.
They want you to think that. They want you to think that way of life is impossible. So don't even try. Spend all of your discretionary income on Uber Eats and Netflix and OnlyFans. And that's that's good for them because they get all of that consumable money right away, rather than you squirreling it away and investing it, putting it toward a house, things like that. That's money that's off limits to the people in power. They don't want regular people to have investment. They can just take it through inflation. And so it's set up for the people that rule over us to extract the maximum amount of wealth that they can. And the result is major sociological suffering. And they don't care about, from the top down, they don't care about the long term. They think like the other one is like John Maynard Keynes, who's kind of the architect of the entire economic system that we live under, who is also not coincidentally, a homosexual. His famous quote is when people ask, well, in the long run, how is this going to work out? And his famous reply is, well, it doesn't matter, we'll be dead.
The danger of centralized power is often represented by the word king. As Americans, we hate the word king. Civilian ownership of body armor is about helping people to have increased power to resist tyrants and criminals. And so, Armored Republic is about helping you to preserve your God-given rights to the honor of the Lord Jesus Christ, because he is the King of Kings, and he governs kings and he will judge them. This is Armored Republic, and in a republic, there is no king but Christ. We are free craftsmen, and we are honored to be your armorsmith of choice.
You know, and like that is the mindset
Yeah.
of our world. And
That's the ultimate gay mindset.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's the same mindset that, you know, the previous few generations, when they enjoyed massive wealth, and they didn't realize that it was massive wealth, they just worked hard and lived in very good economic conditions. They worked extremely hard, and they thought, well, my own hands have gotten me this wealth, and so I'm going to hoard it. I'm not going to, you know, pass it on to my children. I'm going to live a nice, comfortable life.
That's a Bible
until
verse, right? My own
dying
hands
day.
have gotten me this wealth. I think that's somewhere in there.
Yeah, it is. It's not a good one.
No, it's not.
It's not a good one. And now we're paying for it. Right now we're paying for the live, you know, for today and not for tomorrow. Well, tomorrow is here, and all of the seed corn has been eaten through, and we have much less to plant. And so I don't want to like black pill everyone and be like, oh, everything is bad, just despair.
This book is not a black pill book
no,
at
it's not.
all.
No,
Yeah.
I mean, the beginning of, like, a few people are like, oh, I started reading it and it just got me so depressed. And I'm like, keep reading.
We'll get there.
Keep
Yeah,
reading.
we'll get there.
But it is, but in order to be able to do anything actionable, you have to assess what the situation actually is.
Right.
You can't have this rosy colored picture of the way the world is. And because a lot of people think this, like, I'm naturally very optimistic, which apparently optimism, we've discovered is not holy.
Yeah, it's definitely not holy. Definitely not a masculine trait either.
It's not a masculine. Masculinity is fat. What is it? Fat, defenseless,
weak,
very pessimistic.
weak and
and pessimistic. Weak and pessimistic.
Everyone will forget about that tweet by the time this comes out. But this will be a flashback to that. But you should be optimistic. You should hope for the best and prepare for the worst. And in order to do that, you have to see, okay, how are things the worst right now, and what are the things I have to do to overcome the situation that I'm actually in. You have to deal with reality as it is. And so dealing with the reality that we're in can be pretty depressing for a lot of people to, you know, when you take like an ostrich, your head out of the sand and you see that things actually are really bad, it can, you know, make you pretty worried. But you can't stay that way. You have to think, okay, what do I do now? You're in like a survival situation. Like you see like different, you know, shows and movies where the guy crash lands on the island, and once he gets over the shock of realizing his situation, he has to like you know, Tom Hanks in Castaway or something. He has to begin to do things in order to survive and take real steps. And that's the situation that we're in here today, and all of us are in. Is what can we do as individuals? We can't just hope for, oh, somehow, you know, the Caesar or the Protestant Franco will come and make everything right out of nowhere, or there'll be this, you know, randomly this national divorce. Things will get bad enough, and all the good red states will secede, and that'll fix everything. And it's like, no, you can't just hope for these massive events, these black swan events that maybe will come, maybe won't come, and that'll just fix everything. You have to be doing things in your own personal life and in your own community to overcome the world that you're in.
Yep. Amen.
To your point, you know, this fake gift of singleness. You know, I really oftentimes I've known some of these kinds of women that are single into their 40s and, you know, Instagramming their trip to Punta Cana. I mean, you know, Paul wasn't married. Jesus wasn't married. There's a purpose in that. They weren't going to, you know, spring break with their, you know, posting
in their 30s.
Right. And I got to be honest with you. When I see those kinds of pictures, it makes me sad because at the end of the day, like, a lot of that is really fake.
Yep.
They post the picture of their food because that's the best thing they've got going on right now.
Right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
And I know that many of those women, I don't know all of them, but many of them are deeply sad. And if they're not sad yet, they're going to wait a couple years and they're going to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And some of this stuff is coming out. If you've noticed, there have been like TikTok videos and things like that of women realizing that it was all a lie.
Right.
Yeah.
And now they're, almost 40 and they're alone.
Right.
And they can't post another picture of their meal. Like they can't do any of it. And their career is nothing. It's just like, it's deeply sad. It's deeply sad. And I think that, the pastors and the, influencers that are promoting that as normal. It is not normal for a woman to be single in her 30s, going to Punta Cana every year. That's not normal.
Right. Not only is singleness not a gift, really, biblically speaking, we could say that it's a curse. If you don't have the gift of celibacy, that makes singleness possible, that makes singleness in a righteous method possible, to where you're righteously single, that you're single with holiness, then it's a curse. And even beyond that, like you think of, there's so many things that not even that long ago, not just biblical writers, 2,000, to 3,500 years ago, but even just a couple generations ago, certainly a couple hundred years ago, if you didn't have any posterity, if you didn't have a son to carry on your name, like this was viewed as a curse from God. I mean, biblically speaking, this God's word even says
people would weep over this.
Yeah, they would weep over this. It's like God didn't give to us any children, or God didn't give us any sons. Like right now, I've got 3 girls and 1 son. I'm so grateful for the 4 children that I have, and my wife and I. We if the Lord allows, we want to have more, and if we have more girls, praise God. Because my daughters are just the greatest thing that ever happened to me. But I hope that we have another boy, in part because right now my son, Franklin Webben, is on every side of my family. He's the only of his generation, the only Webben that exists, male Webben. And the name, if not, the name is just going to be gone. So right now it's all riding on him. So I'd like to just, in mercy, help him out and give him a brother,
Right, of course.
So that it doesn't all ride on him. He can kind of share that burden, but that's, so sad.
You see this too. Like, recently with all of the, rumors of war and things like that. Right. You see the Selective Service tweet out, if you're the last male in your family name, you're not exempted. You still have to register for the draft. And that wasn't the case. The reason they say this is because it's kind of in the lore of the American populace that during World War II and Vietnam, things like this, that was the case. If you were the last son and all your other brothers went off to war, you were exempted from having to go serve because they wanted to preserve family names. Right. That was a deep part of our culture. And with them saying that now, it's like, sorry, too bad if your family is wiped from existence.
Right.
That's the way it is. And you even see this with the Bible. In the Bible, in ancient Israel, with the Levirate law, where posterity really, really matters, and maintaining a family line really matters, so much so that if there is a single brother, he's supposed to marry his dead brother's widow to raise up posterity for his dead brother.
Right.
And you think like, oh, that's kind of antiquated, and that's this barbaric Bronze Age kind of ritualism, and of course that's the the ritual law in the Bible. It's not binding. It's on the Old Covenant. It's not today. But there's still this kind of wisdom that you could take from it, and it is carried over throughout all of the history of Christendom, that you want to preserve your posterity. You want to carry on your family name. That's a real thing that people used to care about. And now they don't. You see this with kind of like with like older boomer relatives talking to their kids who don't never got married, or they did get married and they don't have kids. Like, when are you going to give me grandkids? When are you going to give me grandkids? And it's become almost a trope of millennials. Like, stop ragging on me, mom and dad. I just want to live my life. And that's a major failure. And in part, the boomer generation, many of them only had 1, 2, or 3 kids.
Right.
When their families, they grew up having 6, 7, 8 kids, 10 kids. And despite having the material prosperity to be able to provide for that many kids, they decided not to. So children are this form of wealth that we have decided to not produce in order to have material wealth.
We've gone gay.
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yep, it's right back full circle. Fake and gay. When we say gay, we say what we're saying is fruitlessness, and sadly, that really has seeped into. It's not just the world that we live in, but that is the mindset of many Christians that you'll brush up against on a daily basis. If you talk to them, about, I have 4 kids already, and my wife and I, we intend to have more because we only have 1 son, and we'd like to have 2 to further our line. Like most Christians that I share that with, I have no doubt many people watching this podcast will, get in the YouTube comments and, be upset. Like,
You don't want more girls.
right. You don't want more girls. Yeah, exactly. And it's like, well, I love my girls, but I have 3 of them and I have 1 son, and so, and if the Lord gives me a 4th girl, praise God, but that's like, we have no concept for that. And I'm not talking about the pagan world that hates God. I'm talking about the pagan church that hates God. I'm talking about, those who are Christian in name only. Some of them are not regenerate. Many of them are not regenerate. But for those who are regenerate, they're so immature and so uneducated and so detached from biblical thinking. Yeah. Like they don't even realize how much it's like, oh, so whether it's forms of government, democracy, like democracy must be biblical. And it's like, it's so convenient, assumed. Right? Yeah. It's just so convenient that like all of your thoughts, you say these thoughts are biblical thoughts. Are they biblical thoughts? Or are they thoughts that haven't really been thought by anybody in humanity until 60 years ago? And so you've isolated them into the Bible, and so
you assume that's everybody thinks this way, so it must be biblical.
Right.
Right. That's the typical thing. And usually it's like really well-meaning people. It's not people who are like intentionally subversive.
Right.
I think this way. It's people that don't know any better and they've never questioned.
They're uneducated. Yeah.
Oh, well, is democracy good? I don't really know. Is not having kids good? I don't really know. Like that's never been the thought has never been challenged.
Right. It's never been challenged.
The gayness sometimes runs very covertly, I think, because what I've noticed too is a lot of the men who would encourage women and men in their singleness as a beautiful gift. A lot of these guys have big families. I've noticed. They have their kids in Christian schools. So they're doing what is the right thing. Yeah. But they've accepted the fakeness and the gayness of this world so much that they've kind of gone a little gay. They don't pass it on. Yeah. They don't pass on what they themselves are doing.
Yeah, the opposite of what Jesus says about the Pharisees. Where Jesus says,
right.
Listen to what they say. They sit in Moses' seat, but do not do what they do.
Yes.
The reality is, don't listen to anything they say. And do the things that they're doing.
That's exactly right. And that's what I mean. It's like the gayness is a little deeper in that situation. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Because they're doing all the right things a lot of the time. It's amazing. And sometimes it's funny, you get, pastors that, viciously defend public school, they've got people in their congregations that go to public school, so they want to defend it. Yeah. Right. They send their kids to the classical Christian school.
But the sad thing about that is that how is that any different, that pastor in an evangelical church, any different than Kamala Harris? Like that's exactly what like our atheist, politicians do, right?
He's probably better speaking than her.
With lockdown, you would hope so. With lockdowns in 2020 and everything that happened, like that was one of the big things that conservatives were saying, and rightfully so, is they were saying, well, wait a second, you guys, you're talking about, all the virtues and the wonderful thing about, the yellow, who doesn't love a yellow school bus, and like who doesn't, about public school. Meanwhile, all your kids are in pods, like these, where you've hired like a private, Latin speaking, professor to come and teach your 6 kids between these 3 families privately in your gated community, right? You have hired security, as you're saying, defund the police. And so all we're saying, I think that, one of the big themes that we're getting across in this episode is it's all fake. It's all gay. You live in a dystopian. It's here now. It's not something that might happen. It's here now. So we got to talk about what to do about it. And the only thing that I'm trying to drive into the episode in addition to that is just saying, and the difference between the trash world of secular culture and the trash world of the evangelical church is very minimal. That difference, those lines are blurred.
Up with all these different copes, right? All of these very holy, pietistic rationales on top of it.
Yep.
Where it's like, the singleness one is a big one, but also, when people talk about the idolatry of the family,
right? Exactly
in that context, and it's
which
like,
is
okay.
insane.
I remember reading and I like Kevin DeYoung, but his article on that, and I get it where you see families saying, "Oh, we're not going to go to church today because we're going to do family time,"
Right.
or my son has a baseball game, or things like that. It's like, yeah, that's idolatrous, but it's not the family that he's idolizing. It's
Right. It's baseball.
Yeah, it's baseball, or it's getting to spend time with your kids and not go to church. Like
Comfort.
you're not. It's you can certainly take certain things. Well, some people probably when they hear you talk about, oh yeah, you should have a lot of kids. It's like, well, am I not holy if I only have 3 kids and we can't have any more? And of course not. Or they'll say, well, that's idolization. I know people that had 10 kids and they shouldn't have had so many because they can't afford it and things like that. And they made an idol of it. And it's like, okay, it's not as though there aren't extremes that you can go to.
But that's the whole thing. When I say evangelicals
wise.
are no different than the pagan culture, is that what the pagan culture has done to become so debased is that we've lowered everything to the lowest common denominator. So no kid left behind. And how are we going to do that? We're going to make sure every kid's stupid. Like none of them would be able to read. Yeah. But what my whole point again is that the evangelical church has taken the exact page out of the culture, pagan culture's playbook. Like, so what we've done is we've said, well, some people are single and they're lonely. Yeah. So then we don't,
everyone has to.
Right. Yeah. So, so every single time that we could, try to talk about the virtue of fatherhood and motherhood and this and that.
What about the single people?
What about the single people?
Yeah.
So then in a nutshell, what happens in our culture, and there's no difference, it happens in the church, is that the footnote becomes the headline 100% of the time. Yeah. Footnote becomes the headline and the headline becomes the footnote. So now instead of saying marriage and family are good, and yet there are a few individuals that God calls to be single. Instead, it's singleness is good, but I guess it is permissible that, to have some kids. I guess it's and then you wonder, like, okay, here we are. That's why we're where we are.
Well, and a lot of it too, I think, is in part of it is this sort of quasi Gnosticism where all you care about is spiritual life and the heavenly life and eternity and everything is, what am I doing for eternity? What am I doing for eternity? And neglecting things and duties that you have here on earth. And God created this world and He wants it. It's His, and He wants a people to continue on generation after generation. You see this in the Bible, like this emphasis on posterity and generations and a future, and it's tangible, it's real, it's not Gnostic.
Right.
They're real flesh and blood human beings that you need to create into the next generation. And we just totally neglect that because it doesn't sound very holy to talk that way. It doesn't sound very, it sounds very earthly and fleshly. Like, in order to create more children, you have to have sex. And that's not holy, that's kind of like the attitude that these people have, and it plays out in all of these things. And so the quasi pietistic Gnosticism that many evangelicals take almost solace in fits hand in glove with a fake and gay world because they both are not focused on any future in the world. They're focused on either their fleshly desires here and now, or heaven that isn't here right now.
Yep. 17th dimension.
And so you neglect the actual duties that you have into the future, to your children, to the people around you. Whether you're married and going to have kids or are actually called to singleness, you still have duties to the posterity that God is bringing in. Those duties still exist. And that should be the focus of God's people is what are we doing here and now on the earth? What are we building? What kind of culture are we creating? Are we building this big, beautiful cathedral, or are we burning it down?
Right.
And so many people think burning down the cathedral is much more holy.
Yep. You're right. And that's kind of leads us into our second episode. So we'll leave it here, but the second episode that we want to talk about is loser theology.
Excellent.
Evangelicals are committed to losing, and we're going to draw out some more of those key characteristics of how do we lose the game and why that's wrong and how we can win instead. So thanks for tuning in.
Awesome.
Did you like the episode? Great. You want to watch the next one? Wait a whole week. Or go to patreon.com, Right Response Ministries. Again, patreon.com, Right Response Ministries. Binge the whole season right now. What are you waiting for?